What happened here is that more than half of the reserves of the EPP in 2022 were spent on a couple of consultants. When this is discovered by the European Parliament, you could say, okay, maybe Weber didn't know about it, but Bakolas did it behind his back. But then after it's discovered, he should have been furious.
Follow the money.
Under the leadership of German politician Manfred Weber, Europe's biggest party hired two consultants with deep ties to Greece's ruling party. In the studio with me in Amsterdam is Follow the Money journalist Simon van Dorpe. Simon obtained documents that showed that those consultants were paid more than €500,000 in just 6 months. I'm your host Emma, and this is the podcast of the investigative newsroom Follow the Money. Welcome Simon, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
Before we dive into the details of your story, let's start with talking about this person, Manfred Weber. In your story, you even describe him as the most powerful politician in the EU. Why is he so powerful and who is he?
Yeah, so Manfred Weber, although he's not the most famous EU politician, is definitely one of the, if not the most influential political player in Brussels. So he is a German, he's 53 years old. He joined the European Parliament in 2004. He's from the Christian Democrats in the south of Germany, in Bavaria, where they're called the CSU. And he gradually built out his network of influence in Brussels. In 2004, he joined the parliament. In 2014, he became the leader of the EPP group, so the Christian Democrats or conservative center-right fraction in the parliament.
Which is the largest party in parliament at the moment.
By far, yes. So they have 185 MEPs, which is more than 1 out of 4 MEPs is part of the EPP. And in 2022, he also became the president of the EPP party. And they are important as a connection to the national party. So the member parties. So for instance, before big political summits in Brussels, they will host they will sit together and prepare those summits with all the heads of government, heads of state. So yes, plays an important role.
And so what is it about him that made him able to reach this level of influence? What does he have that makes him special?
I mean, obviously, it's someone who really knows the ins and outs of the Brussels political system super well. He's not very famous. Some people say he doesn't have a lot of charisma. Inside Brussels, he has proven to be a very shrewd tactician. So he never held top executive office, but as I said, he was the leader of the EPP group, then also the party. That's a super important position because you distribute the positions, the jobs, who can lead an important file, who can chair a committee in the parliament. Those are the types of decisions where Manfred Weber, also how is our group going to vote, he plays a crucial role in that.
You mentioned the year 2022, that's when he became president of the EPP. And in 2022, something else happened that caught your attention. That's what this story is about. What exactly happened there?
Yeah, so it's in the immediate aftermath, actually, of his election to be the leader of the party, the president of the party. There was a big congress in Rotterdam, thousands of delegates of the EPP gathering in Rotterdam in a big conference room where indeed Manfred Weber first got elected and then presented Thanassis Bakolas as his secretary general. So Thanassis Bakolas has worked for 20 years for the Greek prime minister and was proposed by Manfred Weber as the secretary general, meaning that he is the person who has the daily leadership of the party, who signs the contracts, makes the day-to-day management decisions. And soon after, the party hired two consultants, Jerry Zagridis and Eric Parks, who are also from Greece and who also, as Bakolas, had ties with Greece's ruling party, Nea Demokratia, which is the party of Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in Greece. And what our investigation found is that in less than 6 months, these two consultants were paid 570,000 euros at least, and probably even up to 800,000 euros, which are very big amounts. We're seeing more or less every month payments of more than 50,000 for each.
Why did this grab your attention in the first place? Is it weird the party hired these consultants? Is it remarkable that they were all from Greece? Why was that interesting for you?
I mean, look, there is, it looks like a conflict of interest. You have a secretary general who has been working for the Greek prime minister for 20 years, who then hires two consultants soon after he's appointed. And these consultants get very big contracts for communication services and perhaps some strategic communication more, which were previously just done internally inside the EPP party. But also that they're very close to the prime minister in the sense that Eric Parks, he was a very important advisor to Mitsotakis in various roles, gave advice to the Greek prime minister. And then the other advisor was an assistant to a member of the New Democracy Party for 6 years in the European Parliament, and is now also rumored to be running for next year's election.
You're not the only person who saw this as a controversy. In fact, the European Parliament also flagged the transactions to these consultants. What exactly was the concern of the European Parliament?
Yes, so indeed, the European Parliament, about 8 months after the start of these consultancy contracts, the Parliament saw, oh, wait a minute, this is way too much money for the services. They had an internal investigation, and they decided not to cover the expenses, because it's important to know that 90% of the budget of these EU political parties is covered by the European taxpayer, by the European Parliament. And but they have quite rigorous controls on that, and so they noticed it, and they also ordered the EPP to stop these contracts with the consultants, and then the EPP in turn also ordered the consultants to pay back part of what the EPP had already paid out.
But why was this a concern for them? Why did they think this was wrong?
There are a number of red flags here, as we already said. There's at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. There were a number of contracts which were signed. I mean, if for amounts above 60,000 euros, and here we're speaking about more than 500,000 euros, for amounts of more than 60,000 euros, you need a whole process. So you need to ask 3 offers from different parties. There's a competitive process which is organized. Question mark whether in this case all of those rules have been respected. Second, also there's an appearance that there might be a subsidization from an EU party to a national party, which is also strictly prohibited by EU rules. We've seen, for instance, the case with Marine Le Pen, where that was from the group in the European Parliament. You had like a structural subsidization of the national party in France, which at that moment didn't have much Rassemblement National or Front National. So yes, those are very serious things. Marine Le Pen, there's a big criminal trial going on right now, which may prevent her from running to be the next president in France.
But from what you describe, in a way, it sounds like here the European Parliament, actually what we can reasonably expect of the European Parliament, they saw that funds were not being used in a correct way. They intervened, and you would think, okay, case closed. Yet, for you, there was still a reason to dig further into it because there was actually more to investigate. What was that made you investigate this further?
Yeah, so the amounts made us investigate further. So we got official proof of the payments from well-informed sources. I was approached originally by one of the sources, and then one source put me in touch with another source, and like this, the ball started rolling. In total, we spoke to 6 former EPP employees, and we got the evidence of the payments. But we saw that on this date, so much money was paid from this account to this account. This we saw, and that made us think like, whoa, these amounts are not just a bit overpaid; they're significantly overpaid. Because for instance, we checked with other political parties what kind of money they're paying for communication services, and for instance, the Greens, they pay not more than 5,000 euros per month net for communications advisors in a month.
And this is 100K per month for 2 consultants.
And this is 10 times as much. And then you have to start asking the questions, okay, what is going on here? You have 2 people who used to work for, close to the Greek prime minister, or who have ties with the New Democracy Party, who get contracts which are seriously overpriced. And we also got confirmation from several people we spoke to in the party that the work they did was not spectacular.
In comparison to other communication services in other political parties, we're talking about large sums of money. At the same time, you have uncovered some major corruption cases where we're talking about way larger sums, and then in comparison, these are actually small amounts. Yet you do feel quite strongly about this case. Why do you think it's still quite a scandal?
Well, I wouldn't say the amounts are low in some other corruption cases. For instance, the Huawei case, which is a case about members of the European Parliament allegedly being bribed by lobbyists for the Chinese tech giant Huawei.
Which is another big investigation that you did.
Which is another big investigation. We see the amounts are actually much lower. The difference is that there are allegations of sort of direct bribery, of amounts being paid without counter.
Which is not what we're talking about here.
Well, what we're talking about here, we don't know. I mean, there were signs that this should have been investigated further, especially the proximity to the Greek political party, but also the question of has there been a proper procurement? Have there been 3 offers? Was there not a conflict of interest? Have all the rules been followed? All these questions, we asked them to the European Parliament, we asked them to the European People's Party, and we got virtually zero response. But the specific questions about things that, according to the laws, and we looked very well into all the different rules that apply, should have been investigated further. And, the people who deal with this, there are enough authorities who may have looked into this. There are enough people who can look into such a case. But this doesn't seem to have happened. There have not been any administrative sanctions. This has not been referred to the European prosecutors. So yes, then we believe that is our duty to ask those questions. And if we don't get responses to them, we have even more suspicions. But that's where we have to leave it.
If we tie it back to the beginning of the episode, the man that we started talking about, Manfred Weber, how do you tie it back to him? What is his role in this whole story?
So yes, Manfred Weber was, of course, the president of the EPP. He is the person who proposed Thanasis Bakoulas, the Secretary General, as his right-hand man, the man who would implement on the ground. And then immediately after Bakoulas is appointed, we get this these huge contracts. I mean, what happened here is that more than half of the reserves of the EPP in 2022 were spent on a couple of consultants. When this is discovered by the European Parliament, you could say, okay, maybe Weber didn't know about it, Bakoulas did it behind his back. But then after it's discovered, he should have been furious. I mean...
Was he furious?
Well, he didn't fire Bakoulas, so that's what we think. Bakoulas kept working there for another 2 years, and in the end he was... not directly fired. He was not proposed for re-election as it goes then. But
he's not there anymore.
No, he's not there anymore. But that was for another reason, according to media reports, and 2 years after this was discovered. So we feel there's also the signature of Manfred Weber on the accounts of 2022. So he definitely has a political responsibility, and it is for us also hard not to believe that he knew directly, when it happened. And if he didn't know directly, it's weird that he didn't fire his Secretary General after the story broke. Selecting a Secretary General is one of your single most important tasks, because as far as we heard, Weber is almost never present at the EPP party. He's not his main field of activity remains in the group. That is where he can do his parliamentary work, and the party. I mean, he has apparently quite a large office there, but he's never there. So if you leave all this in the hands of one person, you better make sure that you select this person well. And if the first thing this person does is to squander the reserves of the party on, two consultants with little to show for, then then I think it's definitely a big responsibility that he carries.
And does it say something about the wider modus operandi of the party itself for you?
I think it says something about the modus operandi in the sense that, and this is also something systemically important, is the grip that the European People's Party has on the institutions in Brussels and beyond. So you have members of the European Parliament, the people that you see voting, the politicians, let's say, but the European Parliament is also a huge institution with this entire administration, which has to deal, for instance, with such investigations like the one we spoke about now. And then if you have political appointments, so people, for instance, who used to be MEPs or who used to work as assistant MEPs or somehow within the group, then they're being piloted into positions, and that happens according to certain rules that, like, okay, for instance, yesterday the socialists got this director general job, tomorrow the liberals can claim that one. So that's how it goes. Sometimes they even create entire departments to in some political deal, hey, we don't have a director general yet. Okay, we're going to create a new department for you, so you have a director general. So that is politicization of the administration, right? You're going to create jobs for people because of their affiliation. But of course, if then these people have to rule on whether there should be sanctions against the EPP, the party that they owe their appointment to, there's a huge conflict of interests. So I think that this case really shows it very clearly, right? You have the top of the European Parliament, which decide, okay, we're not going to have an investigation into political party financing of the Nea Democratia party. We're not going to have a closer look at the contracts. We're not going to send this to prosecutors because we don't think there's any criminal activity here. I mean, are you neutral if you make those kind of decisions? If you're appointed by the EPP and now you have to rule about the EPP, so that's an important question, I think, to raise in this context.
So the system of checks and balances is to an extent undermined by the fact that people that are supposed to check each other also have some sort of ties to each other.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, I'm not suggesting, yes, to your question, and I'm not suggesting that there should be no political appointments at all. But that should be reserved maybe, let's say, to the absolute top layer of the administration. And the problem in different EU institutions is that it's going further and further. It's something that we've also seen, for instance, with the European Court of Auditors. There is now a case where the EPPO, the public prosecutor, they want to open an investigation into the former president of the Court of Auditors, but the court refuses to lift the immunity of the former president. And surprise, surprise, more than half of the members of the court, or like at least definitely the biggest group of the members of the court, are all EPP people. So yeah, that's a problem when you politicize.
Go back to this case specifically. You mentioned Bacolas is no longer Secretary General, but that's not related to this case. What about Weber? Has he been tainted by this?
So after we published the story, I think, and good to mention that we didn't publish this story by ourselves, but it was with our Greek partners at Inside Story, and also we published together with Süddeutsche Zeitung in Germany. Of course, Süddeutsche Zeitung is a big newspaper, has a big reach. I'm sure Manfred Weber and the people around him noticed. We had a couple of reactions from members of the European Parliament. For instance, Chloé Ridel, French MEP from the SD group, said the European Parliament, refused to reimburse the costs, but where is the investigation? So she indeed asks for an investigation into this. Another member of the European Parliament, Raquel Garcia Hermida van der Walle, Dutch MEP of the Renew Party, she said that this money is meant to keep the democracy alive, and using it to consolidate power is the opposite. So we do see that this case has brought had some impact.
It had
Now,
impact, but it's no one has been tainted directly by the scandal.
yes, Manfred Weber. Look, Manfred Weber already had a couple of incidents, so to say. He has been sharply criticized for collaborating with the far right in the European Parliament, despite previous promises that they would not do that. There have also been two corruption investigations, one by German prosecutors, one by European prosecutors. Those were both dismissed. They revolved around election campaign financing. So he's often criticized, but so far it has never really got to him. So including in this case, the next day he was sitting in the European Parliament. There were votes going on. You didn't notice anything. It all seemed to bounce off him.
It's quite fascinating that someone with apparently not a lot of charisma, who has quite some alleged wrongdoings on his name, still is one of the most influential people in the European institutions.
Yes, that is possible in Brussels, and of course, what got him into this position of power? One thing you have to hand to him is that he's definitely a very shrewd political player. I think that the same quality also allows him to stay away from this kind of affairs once they break out.
And the EPP and the consultants that we were talking about here, how did they react to all of this?
So the EPP said that they reformed their party procedures after the affair, and they claim that what happened here would no longer be possible under the current rules. As for the consultants, so both Jerry Zagridis and Eric Parks said that they said the reimbursements were voluntary, so they had to pay some of the money that they already received. They had to pay it back to the party. They said that was a gesture of goodwill, and they said everything went according to the rules. Same for the former Secretary General, Thanasis Bakolas. He said there were multiple internal and external checks on this case, and that those all showed that there was nothing, that went against the rules that happened here.
Is this a story for you that's now finished, or is it something you're still following up on?
Well, actually, it's not entirely finished because we've also asked a Freedom of Information request. We've asked all the documents that relate to this case. So, for instance, the offers, we would like to see what were the terms that were set out for this contract, what were the different offers, also the communication between the different institutions about this case. Has the European Parliament, for instance, flagged this too? There is a special authority to check on the finances of political parties. Has this authority been informed about this case? Why haven't they opened an investigation into funding of national political parties by EU parties? So we've asked a lot of documents, and we hope to see some of them, and who knows, that may lead to some further reporting.
Because you also feel personal motivation to not let this rest for now and dig into it further.
Well, personal motivation. It's true that that after seeing that after really working on this case for a couple of weeks and months and speaking to people who are involved, that we feel that the truth has not entirely come to the surface. So we will try to make that happen.
And once you do, I think we will be back here to discuss that follow-up.
I would gladly join you again, Emma.
All right, then for today, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you very much for joining me again, Simon, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks a lot.
You've listened to the podcast of Follow the Money. Our watchdog journalism is funded by our members. Subscribe and support European investigative journalism.